Hey, yo, Schizo Jitsu here, talking Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal rematch in boxing at the Honda Center in Anaheim. Over 18,000 sold out crowd. I was there. I was in attendance. Amazing night of fights. I mean, the fights up until that point, there were some hit and misses. I mean, I think it was a mostly MMA crowd as I was kind of thinking about it there because, we MMA crowd, we want action. We don't care so much about the sweet science and setting up your punches and lackluster rounds. I mean, so there was some fights that were a little not the most exciting. And I'm not going to talk too much about the undercard, mostly because honestly, the main event stole the show and saved the night. I mean, it was kind of not the most boring, boxing. I'm just saying, coming as an MMA fan, and I think, first off, I say 90 to 95% of the fans in attendance were Nate Diaz fans. They were there for Nate Diaz. Jorge Masvidal was getting booed every time, his picture came up on the screen, anytime he talked, anything Miami mentioned, it was getting booed, So even Chris Avila had a huge buzz just because he rides with Nate Diaz and he's part of that real fight organization that they have there in their camp. And he was going against Anthony Showtime Pettis, who everyone knows was the face of the lightweight division in the UFC at one point. Mr. Wheaties box, Showtime kick. I mean, amazing fighter in his own right. Up there in age now, 36, 37-ish, but Chris Avila was the favorite, and I believe everyone was cheering for him just because he is riding with Nate Diaz and part of that crew. So, I mean, it was definitely a pro Nate Diaz crowd, 90, 95%, easy, So when they announced Nate Diaz, the crowd erupted. It was crazy. They had multiple waves going on, different levels, one going this way, one going that way, waves, just people were just, it was insane, man. It was an electric crowd. It was for being such a rowdy crowd. I seen one fight in the stands, nothing too crazy. It did end up going into the tunnel and seeing. I would like to see if anyone has that on TikTok or on X or something. Any more footage of that because we couldn't really see too far. It was on the other side, But for overall, for being that kind of intense environment with a lot of intense individuals, especially with the ticket prices a little lowered. I mean, it wasn't really. It was pretty much everyone was getting along, and it was electric. I mean, it was crazy. Like when Nate Diaz, he is a bona fide superstar. There's no doubt about it. He can do no wrong. If he win, lose, or draw, he always wins. You know what I'm saying? Nate Diaz is a freaking icon at this point. So much love, so much support, no matter what he was doing. And anytime he threw a punch, it was, the crowd was going nuts. So. Getting to the fight, there was a little bit of controversy with the result. I mean, it was a majority decision for Nate Diaz. I believe one judge had it a draw, one had it 97-93, one 98-92, which is 8 rounds of 2, 7 rounds of 3, which I think it was a lot closer than that. I honestly thought they were going to say Masvidal because he did land the cleaner shots, the more powerful, noticeable, highlight reel shots, Nate Diaz's face going boom like that. You don't see too much with Nate doing that. Nate came out strong with a lot more volume. Like when he fought Jake Paul, he kind of started a little slow. You can see the definite improvements in Nate just from one fight to the next, how he came out, I don't want to say guns blazing, but just the volume was up. He was throwing a lot of volumes, a lot of jabs. He threw over 300 jabs in this fight. Both these fighters combined for over 1,300, almost 1,400 strikes thrown. They didn't have the highest land percentage, but these guys are wily veterans, both 39, but wily veterans. So, you're not just going to be able to just land flush on them. They have good defense. They have good boxing, just good boxing awareness and just they know what they're doing out there, which was kind of crazy to see Masvidal come out more of a southpaw fighter in this fight. I don't know if that was intentional to try to because Nate's a natural, that same stance. So I don't know if that was a game plan thing or what was going on, but you could tell he wasn't landing as much. He was landing a lot of hard lefts, but I don't think that was his money punch. His money punch, I think, is more his right hand. So, he did land some of those as well. And if you're going by MMA-based criteria for scoring, then I would say Masvidal won the fight, because he did do more damage. He did land the more telling shots. He threw a lot more power shots. And he outlanded Nate overall and in power shots. But the volume of Nate Diaz and just basically the ring generalship, or, he was constantly going forward and backing up Masvidal against the ropes. Like I said, this isn't MMA scoring. This is boxing where they look at a lot of different things. They don't just look at just who's doing damage. They don't look at all the hard shots landed. They don't look at, they're looking at just everything. Someone who's controlling the distance, someone who's controlling the overall flow of the fight. And I would say Nate Diaz was the one bringing the fight because he did come out and he was throwing a lot more volume right from the start. And I do think that Masvidal was trying to pace himself because, everyone kind of knows that he might gas a little later in the rounds. That's kind of a knock on him. And people were like, myself, I was kind of questioning his cardio just because, even though he barely made weight or he had to get naked type thing, he still had a bit of a belly. And I don't know if he was sticking that out on purpose, trying to just kind of, little gamesmanship there or what. But either way, a lot of people were starting to question, like, did he really train for this fight? And I think he just kind of paced himself overall to last the 10 rounds because I think the overall consensus, like myself included, I was thinking Masvidal is going to come out strong, fast and furious, throwing a lot of heavy shots from the start. And Nate's going to have to weather an early storm, kind of like in their fight in MMA. That fight, it was basically Masvidal came out strong, did a lot of damage, wrecked Nate's face a lot. But then Nate started coming out strong like he always does towards the later parts of the fight. And like Nate Diaz, we all know if there's 6 rounds in the fight or if there's no time limit, he's damn near undefeated. You know what I mean? Because his cardio is insane, triathlete. Everything that he does, I mean, and it's not all like explosive type movements and fast, so it's more just kind of pitter patter type punches, but they're effective. And I think both Diaz brothers have those heavy hands. So it's like when it does, you still feel them, even though they're not coming at it like a fast pace or speed or super sharp, but they are accurate. Both fighters in this were a little sloppy at times, but, Nate with his style, I mean, just kind of throwing 2 punches at once sometimes. But, I mean, it wasn't the highest level of boxing, but these guys put on a freaking show. I mean, they put on 10 rounds of just pretty much nonstop. They could have fought in a phone booth type action, And you had the banter, had the antics, I guess you want to call him, of Nate Diaz, turning his back and being Nate Diaz, do what he does, clowning in there a little. He's a showman. You know what I mean? He loves the fans. That's why the fans love him. They can relate to him. And he could just joke around in there and just be himself kind of thing. And so, I mean, I didn't have a problem with the decision. I do feel like maybe the judges might have been a little bit swayed just by the crowd because the crowd, like I said, was pro Nate Diaz. But at the same time, it's not judged the same as MMA. So I think if you're thinking it's MMA, damage and all that, then you're going to say, oh, Masvidal was robbed and this and that. I mean, a lot of people are coming out saying they thought Masvidal won the fight and it was a robbery. Definitely was not a robbery. It was definitely closer than 90 or 98, 92 or whatever, 8 rounds to 2. If anything, it was 1 round either way, like 6-4 or 5-5. I'd have been cool with the draw, honestly, as well, just because both guys were bringing it and they both put on a show, especially because like every fight up until then, almost every fight was getting boos. I mean, which I kind of hate, but that's what kind of makes me think that it was mostly an MMA crowd because people were booing anytime there was any lull in the action. Anytime there was dead time, people were booing in there. Like Anthony Pettis was getting booed. All these stars, Shane Mosley, Jr., he's getting booed. And they put on a good fight, 10 rounds. I mean, it was a pretty good, fast-paced type fight. Not a whole lot of action, but you had there were some good undercard fights for sure. Even like the Avila Pettis, I think they didn't get booed as much, a little bit here and there, but like almost every fight was getting booed. And it was, had Sean Garcia, Ryan Garcia's brother, lose to Fernando Vargas's son, Amado Vargas, and that was a good fight. That was kind of action packed. Vargas came out guns blazing, going to the body, just tearing up the body and really zapping, I think, Sean's gas tank. And he was kind of already known for not having the best gas tank because most of his fights up until this point were 4 to 6 rounders. So, I mean, this was, I think, a 6 or 8 rounder. So, I mean, it was definitely a little bit step up for him. And maybe he was trying to pace himself, but Vargas wasn't having it. He came out just throwing bombs to the body and just kind of overwhelming him, with everything he was throwing. And finally got the stoppage, I believe like 4th, 5th round, and body shots were adding up and landed a nice uppercut. And it was just a referee stop. I mean, the stoppage was kind of questionable to me. Like, I didn't feel like he was really hurt at that point. He was more kind of tired, probably from the body shots. He wasn't throwing back a lot, so I get it. But it wasn't like he was just on the verge of just being put out. But either way, that was a great fight, for a great show for Vargas to come out and just show out, And we were actually sitting next to some of his like family members or friends of the family, and they were just, I mean, like I said, the fans were nuts. The fans are crazy. It was insane night of fights, and overall, like I said, the main event stole the show. Hats off to both those guys for being 39 years old, coming out and selling out an arena, 18,000. Like over 18,000 people there, screaming their heads off for these two veterans of MMA, not even boxing, and they sold out a boxing arena. So that just goes to show right there. Nate Diaz is a fucking superstar. So is Masvidal in his own right. I mean, he's done a lot of great things, and he has his own fight organization, which is like bare knuckle, basically MMA, which is it's awesome idea as well. I love it. And they're both doing great things outside of the UFC, and they both are talking about wanting to go back to the UFC. I think Masvidal also has a couple fights under his contract. Nate Diaz is obviously out of his contract, but he's calling right out as soon as the fight was over. He called out Jake Paul and Leon Edwards because technically, he almost has a win over Leon Edwards, who is the number one welterweight, the champion in the UFC right now. When he hurt him with a minute left in the fight in their 5-rounder a few years back. So I mean, obviously he wants that back. So if he got to the UFC, had one big fight, he could probably get a title fight just because he is Nate Diaz. He is up on that Conor level, the Alex Pereira level of just, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, like I said, 18,000 fans and 95% were there for Nate Diaz. Sold out arena. I mean, it was packed house. I mean, the lines were ridiculous. I drank one freaking beer. I was like, I ain't going back in those lines. And the prices were kind of ridiculous. I was like, not really worth it. I'll just wait till I get home if I want to drink. But yeah, it was insane night. Like, shout out to both those guys for putting on a fucking show. Like, they literally could have been in a phone booth fighting, just throwing hands, nonstop action, and no quit in either one of those guys because there was some good shots from both sides. I know like Nate didn't land as many power shots, but he was constantly in Masvidal's face, constantly changing the momentum and the timing of, constantly having that jab in his face or, those like those check hooks, those right hands, right check hooks, jab, straight left, straight punches. He was just all over the place with his punching. And I think that probably would sway the judges, obviously the crowd as well, but, because anytime Nate got cracked, it was like, oh no, oh shit. But at the same time, Nate would come right back and start throwing it back. So it wasn't like he was in any kind of danger. He might have got cracked a couple of times. Like I said, the highlight reel shots, the fight night round 3 shots, But at the same time, neither fighter was really seriously injured or hurt, where it's like on the verge of being stopped. So that being said, we'll see what do you guys think what's next for both of these guys. Like I said, Nate Diaz called out Jake Paul, who he has a loss in boxing too. And Jake Paul already responded on Twitter, on X, whatever, said that, you were ducking me for $15 million at PFL. You turned that down. So you're a bitch, whatever he said. I don't remember exactly. But so that fight, I still think is a possibility, even though Jake Paul's fighting Mike Perry later this month. That's another fight that would be intriguing too, with Mike Perry and Nate Diaz or Masvidal. I believe these guys fought like at 175 or something like that. So, Mike Perry's probably around that a little bit more. That'd be an interesting fight as well. Mike Perry, all these influencer boxers or ex-UFC fighters be coming into boxing. There's like a whole little group of guys now that makes it interesting. Like they could all fight each other. You had Luke Rockhold fight. You got Anthony Pettis now fighting. Mike Perry, who's down, Darren Till. There's a bunch of names out there right now that can get it, can put some fights on. Masvidal, I would like to see Nate Diaz, Masvidal do it again. Why not? It was an awesome show. Do it in boxing again, maybe MMA if that's what they want to do. Because like Nate said, he felt like that should be a real fight because both those guys are real fighters. I don't mean real like boxers aren't real fighters. I mean just the fact that you could take the fight wherever it needs to go. And I think that in pure boxing, that kind of, I don't say that favors Nate, but it did take a lot of weapons away from Masvidal. If you look at their first fight in the UFC, Masvidal throws a lot of those fast switch kicks or just kicks to the body, throw some elbows. It does take away from his game a little bit by just being boxing, but both these guys have always had like a dream to fight in the boxing realm and arena. So I think that it does make sense for them to do the trilogy, if it does happen later on down the line in boxing, or maybe they just if both end up back in the UFC for whatever reason or whenever in the future, that's another fight to make right there in the UFC. Jake Paul, I mean, who knows? That fight's always there. He's a money guy. It's a money fight. But I don't know if I even want to see Jake Paul, Nate Diaz again, honestly. I think I'd rather see Gamebred against Nate Diaz again for that trilogy because now they're 1-1. One win for Masvidal in the UFC and MMA, one for boxing and Nate, which both were kind of close. Like the MMA was kind of doctor stoppage thing, whatever, and same thing with this one. Was just like I don't want to say controversial, but it was a very close fight. I could have went either way. A lot of people were trying to scream robbery, but like I said, this is no robbery. This is boxing judging. This is boxing rules. This isn't MMA where damage trumps all. I mean, it's just different. So you can't go by the same. But I also feel that most of the fans there were MMA fans. So, of course, that's why I was like, boo, anytime there was no fucking action. And, yeah, but unbelievable night of fights. I can't wait to see what's next for both these guys. Like, subscribe. Let me know what you guys think. I'm out.